Good morning, Dave.
Good morning. How's everyone?
Good. We heard from Demetra McBride, who's from Arlington, that there's a fire emergency in the building, and I'm wondering if that's affecting our chair, Takis Karantonis, but I do not see him on the line yet, so we may be in delay mode here for a minute. And
Okay.
congratulations on your net zero adoption. I heard you guys passed that on Monday. It's exciting news.
Yeah, we did, and the climate energy plan was approved by majority vote. The issue really wasn't on environmental issues. The issue was on a zoning. There were some zoning provisions that were added, and that created the less than unanimous vote. But total support for a more aggressive agenda and total support for the overall environmental elements of the plan.
That's great. Excellent.
Zoning, as you know, can be a fairly controversial topic.
Yes. And I just, while we're waiting, I just got a note and I'm going to put it in the chat here that just a reminder, if you have not yet registered for the COG annual meeting on December 13th, our Office of Communications is reminding folks to take the time to register if you can.
The other thing, fairly recently, yesterday, the fifth climate assessment came out from the White House. I don't know if people have had a chance to review that, but some fairly interesting reading with that.
Yeah, actually, that's the timing was awesome because we had lined up an item for today's agenda on state of the climate, and the speaker who's joined us today had hoped to be able to highlight the National Climate Assessment, but it hadn't been released. And so now that it's been released, he was up late last night redoing his slides to go ahead and reflect the findings. So that was good. So yeah, that'll be our one of our first agenda items today is to hear about that. And I'm looking through emails and the like to see if we have any. Um, Takis Karantonis said, having a fire emergency in the building, give me 5. So I guess while we're waiting, um, and good morning, Penny. Welcome. One of the things I know that Takis was going to want to do today was recognize Miss Supervisor Gross. This, I think, might be your last CEEPC meeting as an elected official. Is that true?
I'm doing a lot of last meetings these last 6 weeks.
Yeah, well,
Yes, yes.
congratulations on a illustrative career, and we really appreciate your leadership. And since we're waiting for Takis to start the meeting, do you have any words of wisdom as this committee carries on the business that you had a large hand in getting us started over the decades?
Well, thank you. Yes, when I first joined COG, we didn't have a CEEPC committee. COG has expanded its steering committees quite a bit, and I've been very involved with some of them. And CEEPC was an outgrowth of some other environmental work that we were doing, but we really needed to have it focused on, with climate and energy. Before it was just sort of environment as a whole. And I think that it's been amazing. We actually reached some of our goals that we never thought we'd reach, and we're reaching them that before we think we'd reach them in my lifetime, but we are. The region has come together very nicely to work together And we're seeing great strides. I'm not sure there's any other region in the country that has done what we've been able to do with 3 completely separate jurisdictions, Maryland, DC, and Virginia, with totally different legal structures. So and CEEPC is unique because it has more than elected officials on it. That helps, I think, a lot, because we need to be able to talk to people about their various roles in the region and how we can work together. But I will say, finally, what I have been my exhortation to a lot of people: when you go to these meetings, they're very valuable, but don't leave the information in the room. Take it out. Take it out and talk to other people about it so that you can bring more information into the room. But too often we tend to walk out the door and, well, that one's checked off. Don't leave it in the room. Thanks.
Excellent. I appreciate that. And I'm going to go off camera here for a minute. And I see we have a new a couple new members on the call today. I think I saw um, um, Doria Estrada, Valeria Moore, Emma Cross. While we're waiting for our chair to arrive, might you come on camera and take a minute to introduce yourself and welcome to the committee?
Hi, Jeff. We've actually met before. I was at the previous committee meeting that was held in person, but I'm with the city of Tacoma Park, so nice to see you all again.
Great, thanks.
And hi, I'm Valeria Moore. I'm the energy manager of the city of Alexandria. Nice to meet all of you.
Hi, I'm Emma Cross. I'm the air quality planner at District Department of Transportation.
So I just talked to Takis. He's still outside dealing with the fire. It turns out that's a fire drill, not a fire emergency. So that's good news. And thanks, folks, for introducing yourself there. I guess there's one other person that I think, I guess some other folks I see here. Noelani Brockett, Naeem Mia. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Good morning. I'm Naeem Mia. I'm a legislative analyst with Montgomery County Council.
Oh, great. Welcome.
And you mentioned Noelani. She's actually a new climate planner working with me at Charles County.
Oh, wonderful. Great. Thanks, Beth.
Yeah. So Noelani, I don't know if you are able to start your camera for a minute. She might be having some issues. I know WebEx is new to her, so she was unfortunately in the Teams waiting room. Don't think she realized it was not a Teams meeting.
Yeah, we
So
apologize for that. We're trying to figure out why, for some reason, we're getting, even though we set these meetings up as WebEx, for some reason it's populating with the Teams, Microsoft's infinite wisdom taking over the world. So,
yeah.
so why don't we Go ahead and since we don't have our chair, let's go ahead and just start with our first item on the agenda, which is to hear from Adam Paris, who's an expert on climate resilience, climate adaptation. Adam, if you want to walk through your presentation, that would be a great way to start the meeting here. And then if Takis joins, we might have to ask you to stop for a second so he can greet us all. But yeah, if you can go ahead and get started, that'd be great.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Adam Paris. I'm a senior consultant with ICF. I've been working on resilience and adaptation for about 20 years. Before coming to ICF, I worked at a number of different city, state, and federal agencies, including the NOAA's Climate Program Office in DC. So I lived in DC for about 5 years and grew up in Maryland. So really happy to be talking to MWCOG. I've also worked for the state of California, and before coming to ICF, the mayor's office in New York City, the mayor's office of climate and environmental justice. This is hot off the press, so I'm really excited to be presenting this material to you all. I'm going to provide an overview of the 5th National Climate Assessment. I was an author on the adaptation chapter, so I've focused more on resilience and adaptation in this presentation, though not exclusively. There is content that covers parts of what we know or feel confident to be impacts, vulnerability, and action, whether mitigation or adaptation in the Northeast. And I'll just flag that because I'm trying to leave time for questions and answers, and I want to make sure to sort of stay in my lane with respect to my expertise. While I've focused on resilience and adaptation, I am a physical scientist by training and have done a lot of work on sea level rise, coastal flooding, and particularly how people respond on the coast. I did the sea level rise scenarios for led the sea level rise scenarios for the 3rd National Climate Assessment. So this isn't my first go round. We can move to the next slide, please. Or do I have control of the slides? No, okay, there we go. Thank you. So one of the main messages overall is the United States is taking action on climate change. Since 2007, emissions have fallen and energy and emissions intensity have decreased. What you're seeing is a comparison from 2000 of what city and state level plans and actions have taken place since 2017. They've increased by 32%. And what you see is on the right-hand side, there are mitigation actions, and on the left-hand side, in the green bars, are adaptation actions, and I've sort of blown up the Northeast. And the circles on the right-hand side indicate where people have started to implement and city-level actions. So I guess one take home is that we are taking action, but another take home, and I'm going to go into this in a little bit more detail, is that we're doing far more to mitigate greenhouse gases and mitigate the potential climate change than we are doing to adapt or basically minimize or reduce the impacts that we know we'll experience and we're already experiencing. Next slide, please. And so this is a map in the adaptation chapter where we started to look at where are people doing things to adapt. And you can see that we have a pretty big gap in the middle of the country. Fortunately, the MWCOG area and other parts of the Northeast, there have been a lot of adaptation plans developed or activities pursued, and on the West Coast as well. And I think that speaks somewhat to the hazards that people are facing, namely a lot of coastal flooding, sea level rise, and coastal flooding. Any amount of sea level rise will increase the frequency, magnitude, and duration of flooding. And we see that not just during the kind of extreme events like tropical cyclones or hurricanes, but on your exceptional high tide or spring tide, where water levels are elevated and people are experiencing nuisance flooding. but it also reflects other extreme events, which we'll get into later. Next slide. So what do those adaptation and resilience actions look like beyond just a plan? This is a figure from the Northeast chapter of the National Assessment. And at the end, I'll say you obviously have the web address on the bottom of all these slides, nca2023.globalchange.gov. But I do have a slide in here that points you to a number of different resources, including the interactive web-based report itself, but also the so again, what you see here is a variety of different planning, policy, programmatic responses, as well as actual projects that people have implemented. Everything from living shorelines that people are implementing to requiring solar photovoltaics, excuse me, and green roofs and other forms of green infrastructure here where I'm based in New York City. And other sort of risk-based actions like the state of Maryland has, as you all very likely know, implemented some additional stormwater guidance where they're taking into account changes in the intensity, duration, and frequency of precipitation. So IDF curves are part of what engineers use then to design stormwater systems or other ways to manage extreme precipitation. So there's really a variety here of actions that people are taking across the Northeast, and that really is the prevailing wisdom or leading practice. I'm not going to say best practice because there's never really adaptation is never really done, but a process of trying things and then monitoring and evaluating how those are reducing risks or decreasing impacts and adjusting along the way. But the leading practice is multiple forms of adaptation, or a portfolio approach is almost always better than a single action or putting all your eggs in one basket. Next slide, please. So definitely, I think there is pretty strong evidence that part of the reason that adaptation is gaining traction and people are doing more to strengthen their resilience is that we are experiencing more extreme events. The number of billion-dollar disasters is increasing. Extreme events cost the United States close to $150 billion every year. And that's a conservative estimate that doesn't account for loss of life, healthcare related costs, or damages to ecosystem services. I know here in New York City, the New York City Panel on Climate Change is starting to explore the EPA's value of life data and methodology to pinpoint the economic costs of health impacts alone. So that's a really, again, this is $150 billion every year is likely an underestimate. And the types of extremes really run the gamut. So we're talking about in between 2018 and 2022 alone, about 89 extreme events, 4 droughts, 6 floods, 52 severe storms. And obviously when I say 6 floods, that's, major floods that that caused $1 billion or more in damages, not the kind of floods that cause significant disruption as well. So 6 floods, 52 severe storms, 18 tropical cyclones, 5 wildfires, and 4 winter storm events. During this period, and I find this graphic, you could misinterpret this graphic, but basically Texas and Florida are the leaders. Texas had the highest total damages across the whole period, 375 billion, whereas Florida had the highest from a single event, Hurricane Ian, which caused $113 billion in damage. Next slide, please. So We are experiencing a range of different extremes, but I do want to flag looking across, and this is one of the values I think of the National Climate Assessment is even though it is national in scope, there are these regional chapters and you can look at climate trends on a regional basis. And what you see in this graphic of observed changes in the frequency and severity of heavy precipitation events is that the Northeast, there really is this increase in uh, total precipitation on the heaviest 1% of days. So that's really short duration, intense rainfall, the kinds that you can experience with really strong convective thunderstorms in the summer, or things like a derecho, which I lived in DC during the derecho back in 2012. Um, and you know, these sort of systems like the remnants of Hurricane Ida, where it no longer was a tropical storm, it still carried a lot of moisture. So we get a lot of precipitation in a short period of time, and that is becoming more prevalent. Next slide. And we see that not just in terms of the climatic data, but also in terms of people's response. So this figure shows flood insurance take-up rates by county in the northeastern US based on the 2020 census housing units and active National Flood Insurance Program policy counts at the end of 2021. So almost half the counties in the region have less than 1% market penetration, while only 2 counties, Cape May, New Jersey, and Worcester, Maryland, have more than 50% of their housing units insured for flood. The lack of coverage, particularly inland from the coast, leaves both individuals and communities at risk of major financial hardship after a flood event. Of course, though, there's also what this graphic doesn't show is the rising cost of flood insurance in some areas. And I would say when I look at this map, I also see some indication of that kind of trend in heavy precipitation, because you do see a lot of take up of flood insurance rates along the coast, but you also see flood insurance rate take up inland, and particularly in the Chesapeake Bay area along the eastern shore of Maryland, you see a lot of take up rates. And so that's obviously influenced by coastal flooding, sea level rise and coastal flooding, but I would argue it's probably, though I'd love to hear from you all, an indication of where rivers meet the coast and there is compound flooding. In other words, you get a lot of rain at the same time as you have some coastal storm surge, and those areas get sort of hit by both of those drivers at once. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is from the Northeastern chapter and really not my area of expertise, but I did find it really compelling to see how, not my specialty per se, but I did find it really compelling to see this graphic of how people are funding different resilience and adaptation measures through voter-approved bonds, taxes and fees, and legislative bonds. So the most common source of state funding originates from annual fees and is largely directed to conservation and natural and working lands, whereas infrastructure projects and capital investments are most often funded through voter-approved general obligation funds, with Rhode Island being one of the main active users. And the source of this figure is actually the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. Next slide. I did want to flag that we are in keeping with looking at these extremes and then especially helping people figure out how to deal with them. We are ICF is embarking on a new project funded by the Department of Defense's ESTCP program, where we're going to look at severe weather impacts to DoD installations. We want to work with and are just setting out to, as we get our funding in January, reach out to installations to work with them to document what happened during extreme events and not just from a physical damages standpoint, though that is relevant, but also from an operational standpoint through tabletop exercises and interviews. Use that documented on the ground expertise and experience to then endeavor to do some damage modeling using FEMA's publicly available HAZAS tool, and then look at what might different resilience measures might do to help the installations be more resilient, and try to align. We have this very general sense of these different measures that people can take, but I think the real translation happens when we can align specific hazards and very specific impacts with very specific context specific resilience measures. So we look forward to doing that project and are actively seeking installation partners. Next slide, please. So I'm really glad to say that I think this version of the National Climate Assessment took up equity and justice in a more substantial way than ever before. Equity is a major theme across NCA 5, including the adaptation chapter, recognizing that underserved and overburdened communities face disproportionate risks and impacts from climate change, and often double jeopardy, right? So many of these communities are historically disinvested or historically underserved. And then you add climate on top of that, and it creates not only greater impacts, but it makes it more difficult to help for those folks to strengthen their resilience and take action. Next slide, please. And so there are frameworks like this one that acknowledge the different elements of equity and justice, the kinds of considerations that are really important to take into account in all phases of what you're doing. And I'm not going to go into these in detail, but the way I like to summarize them is sort of thinking about process, who gets to participate and how welcome do they feel in any one decision process, thinking about the distribution of not just impacts, but benefits, sort of who gets what and how much, and then recognizing that lived experience is important and it takes time to sort of unpack that, sit with it, and recognize it. Next slide, please. In the adaptation chapter, we wanted to acknowledge that as adaptation in adaptation, and sort of take that a step further and say adaptation actions, the things you do to reduce impacts from climate change, are defined by multiple factors. So that's partly on the one hand, decision-making criteria, and I'm going to actually go from right to left on this, so apologies for that. But the decision-making criteria that you all deal with on a day-to-day, if not hour-to-hour basis, but things like what are the goals and objectives or preferences, what capabilities and capacities do you have, what resources are at your disposal, and what do those decision processes look like. But also, especially when you take into account procedural justice and recognitional justice, things that define community culture and kind of the fabric of the communities within which you work, things like the history, the relationships and social capital that you have, the values that communities espouse based on that culture, and how people perceive risk and what they're willing to tolerate. Next slide, please. We also talk in the adaptation chapter about different forms of governance and really how that relates to adaptation. And I think the upshot is that collaboration and flexibility are really important. And there are lots of great examples. And, I would argue councils of government, as you see here in the regional box, are a great example of coordination happening. I was really blown away by the wisdom up front from the councilman of, take the discussion here out into your work. And so we're really in this part of the adaptation chapter looking at different forms of governance, in particular collaborative governance and adaptive governance, and how people can start to build that into their frameworks and the ways they operate. Next slide, please. Another big theme in the overall assessment, and particularly in the adaptation chapter, is we're trying to get a handle on how much adaptation is enough relative to the impacts that we experience. So the evidence now is suggesting that we're really doing more on an incremental basis than we are transforming the systems that we manage and the communities that we live in to meet the full nature of the impacts. So examples of that, I mean, using air conditioning during heat waves, that's a necessary thing right now because we know heat waves are getting worse. Ultimately, though, we need to look at how do we design buildings to be passively cooled? What other mechanisms do we have to make sure that buildings don't absorb heat and indoor air temperatures don't escalate? So it's really kind of playing those things out. Next slide, please. And that's one thing that we do in the adaptation chapter is looking at different scenarios and because it's not really straightforward. So those incremental measures can add up over time to transformation. But sometimes also, if we're only chipping away at the impacts or reacting to them and not anticipating them, then over time, we're not actually reducing risk. We're just sort of letting residual risk accumulate and not transforming the systems. And so to take that example of the air conditioning, that ultimately puts, if everyone has an air conditioner in their home, then that ultimately puts more stress on the energy grid and results in more blackouts. And it's, obviously affects your decarbonization or your greenhouse gas portfolio or goals. Next slide, please. And I'm just going to try to wrap up here pretty quickly so we leave some time for questions. And Jeff, I can stay a few minutes extra. I do have to drop a little bit early, and I apologize for that. So, in sum, climate action is an opportunity to create a more resilient and just nation. So the things that we do, if we do adaptation effectively, in other words, if we take those principles of justice and equity into account, if we look at the distribution of benefits and impacts, if we create a better process, we really can also help address some of the systemic issues. We can't those systemic issues are larger than climate, but when we're going to address climate impacts, we're often looking at a systems level. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And there's a lot of opportunity in what we do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to also adapt. So, there in restoring wetlands, for example, there's also the opportunity to restore some biodiversity and habitat to the coast, reduce flooding, but also store carbon. Next slide. So in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of speed through this, but another key message in the adaptation chapter is that proactive adaptation can help reduce projected damages and costs, and that adapting now is far more cost effective than adapting after. And this is only for two sectors, roads and rail. And it's looking at two different timeframes, 2050 and 2090, and two different climate scenarios, like a really accelerated climate and in 8.5, and kind of more something that's involves some mitigation or greenhouse gas reduction in 4.5, what is the cost of no adaptation, reactive adaptation, and proactive adaptation. And what you'll see is in every case that small gray sliver in proactive adaptation is far less costly. So we're really trying to think about, folks are really trying to think about how to anticipate these climate impacts. In the energy sector, next slide, please. In the energy sector, we do at ICF a lot of energy work, so I just want to kind of play that out within some of our energy resilience work. We're right now supporting all combined gas and electric, almost all combined gas and electric utilities in New York who are responding to an order from the Public Service Commission to develop climate change vulnerability studies and climate change resilience plans. And that builds on some of the early work we did for Con Ed, which you can see this graph is from their climate change vulnerability study, thinking about how do you improve the reliability and functionality before, during, and after an event. Next slide, please. And so we tried to think about across, withstanding different events, absorbing them and quickly recovering, but also adapting. What are the different kinds of measures that you can take? And next slide, please. So coming back to cost for a second and cost benefit, one of the things we're doing for some of these utilities is multi-criteria analysis, which is basically looking at multiple benefits relative to costs and trying to fine tune those adaptation strategies in a way that's very sort of attuned to multiple benefits and costs. So for a hazard like wind, what that means is you might think undergrounding is the best way to go, at least over the 5 to 20 year time frame for some utilities. When you look at the multiple benefits, including community resilience, including serving disadvantaged communities, but also traditional things like economic impacts and system reliability, it can be more beneficial or cost effective to do some additional management of trees in corridors with power lines that are above ground. So that's not to say that we should discount or permanently discount or ignore undergrounding. It's just that for certain circuits, when we did this analysis for a particular utility, we found that actually it's more cost effective, that the total number of benefits divided by the cost, which is different than a BCA, a discrete BCA, results in prioritizing the tree removal and management within a power line corridor over, say, undergrounding, though that could shift over time depending on how those benefits play out as the hazard changes. So I'm just going to ask to flip to the next slide, and I'll go through these really quickly. Just here are all the resources that you can explore to delve into the NCA. Next slide. Excuse me, next slide. There are ways to engage. So there are webinar series coming up this spring and regional workshops that you can explore. There are a bunch of different, there's Spanish translated PDFs, which might help for your outreach and engagement within, to the extent that you find resources in the NCA useful and you want to use those in your own community outreach and engagement, that might be helpful. Next slide, please. There is this atlas, which is a digital viewer and where you can kind of explore some of the data and information in the assessment in a more interactive format. Next slide, please. And then just this beautiful artwork there was a call, Art Times Climate is the first ever call for art to be featured in the National Climate Assessment. And so there's all these beautiful pieces of art woven throughout the assessment And I think that's also useful for outreach and engagement because we do need some inspiration, not just hitting people with doom and gloom, but adding some, kind of meaning to how we think about the impacts of climate change. And if you hit the next slide, that's my last slide, and I'm happy to take some questions before jumping off. Probably about 5 minutes. And sorry, I didn't leave more time, but my email is on the slide, and I'm happy to, if anyone wishes to, if we don't get to your question, I'm happy to talk offline.
Thanks, Adam. And I see, it looks like Takis has joined us maybe by phone.
On my iPad, finally, this seemed to work. This building is finally not on fire. I apologize to everybody for joining this meeting very late. And Mr. Paris, I apologize for having, missed your presentation, basically. I got only the last part. Because we are short on time, questions from Mr. Paris first. And Jeff, you will have to help me manage the meeting because I cannot see the entirety of the hands and the people who want to speak.
Sorry, did you say me, Dimitra?
Dimitra, yes.
Okay, sorry.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you.
Now I can see that. I have a
Thank you.
mobile
Very quickly,
device.
this was a great presentation, and it's good to know we're just finishing up a risk assessment and management plan for inland flooding and a little bit of targeted sea level rise and storm surge exposure. But I was at a recent meeting where a representative from NOAA was talking about a new tool with regard to extreme heat that was going to help really do an accurate calculation of the deaths related from extreme heat events. And I asked them a couple of questions and I reached out to them afterwards to find out a little bit more about the tool and when they thought it was going to be capable of being shared and deployed. I wanted to know if you knew anything about that.
I don't know anything about the timing of the tool. I'm guessing that the person you're talking about may have been from the National Integrated Health Information System effort, NIHIS, Heat Health Information System.
Yes.
Yeah, so I know the folks who at the NOAA Climate Program Office are managing. So if you want to send me an email, I'm happy to try to kind of also send them a message and see if we can't get an update on the timing.
Oh, great. I would really love that because obviously accuracy and really detailing the real numbers would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitra. Any other questions from Mr. Faris? I don't see any.
Yes, I actually have I have
okay.
a question. Okay, this one's actually sort of an easy one. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm really excited to read the whole report. I'm not sure I've ever heard this before, called blue sky functionality. Can you just explain what that is?
Yeah, what we mean by that is just, how the system is functioning in the absence of any weather or climate hazards. So
Okay.
kind of under normal kind of blue sky conditions.
Okay. Because it reminded me of when in Florida we always talk about clear, like that sunny day flooding. So I thought maybe there was a connection, but that's not how this is understood. Okay, thank you.
Of course.
But how amazing is it to deal with systems, quote unquote, where the blue sky baseline is actually flooding and climate change induced on top of that.
Yeah, I think the term that you're probably thinking of, Valerie, which is similar to, is called sunny day flooding, which is similar, if not directly analogous to nuisance flooding. And so that's the kind of flooding that we experience I referenced with an exceptional high tide, sort of a lunar high tide, where there's very little, if any, storm surge, but we nonetheless experience flooding, and that's a
Yeah.
byproduct of,
Yeah,
you
when I
know,
was in Florida, that was a common thing, and it's been called different things. So, anyways, thank you for your clarification.
yeah, of course. I could probably take one or two more questions.
It's red, sir. You're muted. Oh,
I think I'm unmuted now.
yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, Adam, thank you so much for the presentation. I know it's a lengthy report. I was starting to read through late yesterday myself, and I know that you worked specifically on the adaptation section. I had kind of a general question. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I was really interested when you talked about the kind of cost and efficiency analyses that you've done on specific adaptation stuff. I wondered if there's anything sort of like that at a full approach level to the whole plan. For example, like, is there any sense from this of where we get our biggest bang for the buck in terms of making that beginning to really make that transformation to hit net zero? That's a $1 million question, really. So I just didn't know if the report had that like kind of lens at all. It seems more like it's like we need to do all of these things, and I agree with that, but I was just curious.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great question. You're right. It's sort of probably more like $1 billion question. I
Multi-billion, yeah.
yeah. What I'll say is this: I think we have a lot better. I don't want to speak for, and Deb may be able to speak to this better than I can. I don't want to speak for my colleagues on sort of the mitigation chapter, uh, but I think we have a lot better data and reporting systems for what we do to decarbonize and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I know we feel confident that we are lacking information about what adaptation actions people have taken. I showed you the map. I gave you some indication that we're progressing with adaptation. So it's not like we have no data, but it's really hard to track what people are doing to adapt, which then I think gives us, puts us a little bit further behind in being able to say, did X, Y, or Z reduce impacts or risks and at what cost? So the better we get with actually being able to figure out where people have taken action to adapt, recognizing that, you know, not many agencies are going to take actions and it's not going to be classified as adaptation. And our challenge is really, or it's not going to happen under a capital A adaptation plan. It's probably going to happen as part of a hazard mitigation plan, as part of the hazard mitigation programs through FEMA. It's probably going to be a BRIC grant, a Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant, or some other program through IRA, IIJA, and BIL. Once we can sort of track that a little bit better, we will we'll be able to look at those things a little bit better. Having said that, especially on the whole, which I think you're alluding to, is like answering that question, will it be enough? Having said that, one thing that what I showed was really sort of one of a few different prioritization frameworks that people are using. So we have plans, and plans have lots of different actions and that kind of portfolio of here are all the different things that we could do to adapt as you experience climate and weather extremes, and as you take advantage of different kinds of funding that become available. It helps to say we're not going to implement every action in this plan all at once, or in any kind of sequential order. I mean, that's part of the magic of the work that you all do and folks in public agencies do, is sort of say, how do we prioritize what to do now, given the political will that we have in any given moment, the funding that's available, and a whole host of other factors. And those prioritization frameworks like multi-criteria analysis or dynamic adaptation pathways are really useful to go through that exercise.
And
So I
just,
hope that
I
answers your
see
speaks to
another
your
hand,
question.
but quick follow-up. Can you just emphasize, I thought this was a really great slide on the benefits, the cost benefits of proactive adaptation versus reactive. Is there like a magnitude of cost difference that you see across, like 3 to 1 more cost effective, or is it really dependent on the application?
I think it's dependent on the application.
Okay.
So I don't have like a ratio, but unequivocally, it's less expensive to proactively adapt.
Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Yeah.
Dimitra, if it can be handled offline, we are a little bit pressured for time right now. Is it okay? Okay.
Yes, yes, it's a good excuse to
Thank you.
bring Adam back.
If it depends on me, anytime. Besides, I want to hear the original presentation once again. So, thank you so much for being here with us, Adam. As you see, there is a lot of post processing to be had. I'm sure that you will be receiving several emails. So thank you for this presentation. Jeff, a question. I don't believe that
Thanks so
this
much
is
for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
Jeff, I don't believe that the meeting is properly called in order, right?
That's correct. Yeah, we
Okay.
were just jumped right into Adam's presentation while we were waiting. So if you want to go back to the
Well,
beginning and then move to Julia Mano from Prince William County.
yes. So, question to you: do we have a quorum?
Yes.
So very well. So thank you for that. So welcome officially now to the September Climate Energy, to the November, of course, Climate Energy and Environment Policy Committee meeting. In case you don't know, I'm Takis Carantones. I'm a member of the Arlington County Board, and I have the honor to chair the committee this year, 2023. And you just experienced what it means not to have had a vice chair. So we want to fix that today. I don't believe that we have approved the agenda. So before we do that, I want to ask if there are any amendments to the agenda. One part of the agenda already happened, Mr. Pyrus's presentation. Is there anybody with an amendment to the agenda? I don't seem to see anybody. I have one, and I would take chair's prerogative to propose one. And this is related to what I just mentioned. We don't have a vice chair since last fall. The vice chairmanship was assigned to the state of Maryland. And therefore, I now want to ask for your unanimous consent to appoint the Honorable Jolene Ivey, who's a council member representing District 5 in Prince George's County as vice chair, and that would be effective immediately. So this is a motion that I put on the table. It needs a second. Do I hear a second? Excellent.
I'll second.
Who was first? Can you just state your name and your jurisdiction, please, for the record?
Well, this is Randy Freed from Prince William County, but I don't think I was the first one to speak up. Did anybody else talk before me?
I don't know, but let's keep it simple. And for the record, Mr. Randy Freed is a second. So is there anybody opposed to that? I will assume acquiescence of the committee if nobody is opposed. Are there any abstentions? I don't see. So then welcome Jolene Ivey as the vice chair for 2023 to this committee. Then I will go forward in asking you to approve the agenda as a whole as amended with the motion that we just approved. Is there any objections? Any abstentions? No, so the agenda is considered approved. And then we have also our July meeting summary, for which I want to check whether there is any amendment to that summary. I hope you had the opportunity to read it. Is there any? Mr. Ponticello? No? Okay. So then are there any objections to approve the July meeting summary? Any abstentions? None? I don't see any. Thank you. So and with that, we can return actually to the agenda to hear from Ms. Mano, from Ms. Julia Mano, who's the director of the Office of Sustainability with Prince William County. She will present the county's adopted Community Energy and Sustainability Master Plan. Ms. Mano, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Julia Mano. I'm the director of the Prince William County Office of Sustainability. And I'm excited to share that a few weeks ago, the Prince William Board of County Supervisors voted to adopt our Community Energy and Sustainability Master Plan, essentially our county's climate action plan. So this is a really important step forward for Prince William in addressing climate change on the local level in a strategic way. So this morning, I'm going to be providing some background information on how we developed the plan, what's included in it, and what its adoption means moving forward. Next slide, please. So first, I'm going to back up to November of 2020, when our board adopted our climate mitigation and resiliency goals. These goals are focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, incorporating more renewable energy, and becoming more resilient to the impacts of climate change. Goals 1 and 5 may look very familiar to you. They were adopted from COG's regional goals. And then we have goals 2, 3, and 4 that are specific for renewable energy and county government operations. So as you can see, these goals are really to achieve, just a lot of low-hanging fruit. Now, you can see that they are pretty ambitious, as I know is the case for many localities. Next slide, please. So once the goals were set, we weren't starting from scratch when aiming to meet them. The county already has well-established environmental programs. We've had our environmental council for many years, our stream restoration programs, energy efficiency programs, and a lot more. That one of the first things that we did was document all that in the plan. This was a really important part of our planning process, starting to consolidate and document all of the work that has already been going on in the county in one place. That's something that we previously did not do. So, we already had a lot of great work already happening. We had sustainability action strategies in our comprehensive plan and strategic plan already, but we really needed a centralized strategic approach for addressing these new specific climate mitigation and resiliency goals. We did not have an organized strategy or staff yet focused on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. So with that said, the board, once the goals were established the Office of Sustainability last March. I was hired to stand up the office and tasked with developing the CEEPC to lay out what it would take to meet these new goals. Next slide, please. So we brought on our consultants. We used AECOM. And one of the first things that we did was we brought together what we called our county core team, which was made up of the agencies that you see here. These agencies met regularly for the past year and a half as the primary contributors to the plan. So, many hours spent together developing the plan's content, reviewing drafts, creating implementation plans. And it was just a big team effort that we worked together on. Next slide, please. So I'm going to move into the stakeholder engagement. One of the first things that we also did was to establish our Sustainability Commission. So the Sustainability Commission are board-appointed citizens meant to serve as the public advisory body to provide recommendations throughout the development of the plan. We have the chair of the commission, Mr. Randy Freed, on the call as well. Thank you, Randy, for all of your efforts and for leading the commission throughout this process.
Sure.
We also established our joint environmental task force, which is a collaboration between the school board and the county to work on sustainability initiatives together, make sure that we're more cohesive moving forward. Next slide, please. In terms of engagement with the community, we put out multiple surveys and we held 2 town halls throughout the planning process. What we learned from this engagement were the general public priorities. We heard a lot that the public was interested in planting and protecting trees, providing more bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, streamlining our solar permitting, increasing commercial building energy efficiency, and protecting our natural water resources. Next slide, please. Another thing that we did was we held a series of 5 workshops with community organizations in the county. And so we pulled together groups with expertise in buildings and decarbonization, transportation and land use, and climate adaptation and resiliency for vulnerable populations. These workshops really helped us to, once we had a long list of actions, to prioritize which actions should be highest priority in the plan. And they also helped us to evaluate or to develop our evaluation criteria. All right, so now I'm going to try to quickly summarize the foundational analysis of the plan. This is our county's 2018 greenhouse gas inventory, prepared by COG. Thank you. As you know, these are prepared every 2 years. We used our 2018 inventory as a basis since the 2020 inventory was a bit skewed from COVID. And, I think our inventory looks similar to a lot of localities. It shows us which sectors most of our emissions are coming from. So, we quickly see that our actions needed to be focused on our transportation, residential, and commercial energy sectors. Next slide, please. We then developed a greenhouse gas forecast and reduction scenario. So this was the data foundation for our climate mitigation goals. We took the greenhouse gas inventories that we already had in that data, and we forecasted out our emissions to 2050 because that was our last goal year. This right here is just a snapshot of 2030 for our 2030 goal. But we extrapolated out our data to 2050 using the growth factors that have been established through our comprehensive plan that was adopted in November of 2022. So we incorporated expected increases in population, vehicle miles traveled, commercial building square footage, and looked at where we would be in 2050. We then took into consideration external market factors. So things like expected improvements in technology, expected adoption of electric vehicles, and other market forces that will be working in our favor. And we subtracted that from the forecast. And what we see here is that in order to meet our 2030 target, we should be aiming to reduce our emissions by 2.5 million metric tons of CO2. I will say that in my opinion, our forecast and reduction scenario is somewhat of a conservative approach because we didn't consider every possible external market force. We didn't include, for example, potential impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act, just because the impacts are unknown at this point. However, I expect that when we revisit these numbers in a few years, hopefully the external market factors will have been more impactful than we projected here and will have worked in our favor more than we thought, which will be great. Next slide, please. We also projected the estimated reductions that our actions will have in the plan. So many of the actions in our plan are voluntary and will rely heavily on community participation. For example, how many community members are participating in efficiency programs or adopting electric vehicles, things like that. So we have estimates for if our actions have a high level of participation, that's where you see that kind of like lime green bottom line. If we have a lot of citizens participating in these actions, and then if we have low participation, we have an estimate there as well. I want to point out that we found that even if we implement all of our actions and with high participation, we still will have a gap there that we need to meet or fill to meet our 2030 goal. So what we have recommended in the plan is that, for this gap, whatever it may be in 2030, we are suggesting that the county assess whether or not we would like to purchase high quality carbon offsets at that time to fill that gap to meet our goal. Next slide, please. So that was the data foundation for our climate mitigation goals. And then we have a climate adaptation goal. And for this goal, we conducted a vulnerability assessment to determine which of the county's assets are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. We just heard a lot about this from Adam with ICF. The results were not surprising. So you can see what we did is we first looked at all of the county's different assets. You can see that across the top, safety, security, food, water, and shelter, transportation. And then down the side, you can see our climate hazards. We're looking at precipitation, extreme temperature, drought. And if you go to the next slide, please. Basically, the summary of the results are that, again, unsurprisingly, the county's biggest climate hazards is extreme temperature and precipitation, think about flooding, and that the county's most vulnerable assets are socially vulnerable populations. And we did use equity emphasis areas to determine which areas in the county have the highest concentration of socially vulnerable populations. And our transportation infrastructure and natural resources are most vulnerable as well. So through the vulnerability assessment, we are able to see where we need to focus our adaptation actions. Next slide, please. So once we developed, based on our foundational analysis, we developed a long list of actions that would address the results of those analyses. And we then developed our action evaluation criteria. So, and we use this criteria to prioritize the long list of actions. As you can see, we did not just choose the actions that reduced greenhouse gas emissions the most. We also looked at things like, equity, resource conservation, cost to the county, other factors that are also very important to the county. And we use these action evaluation criteria to narrow down our long list to 25 high priority actions. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to briefly go through the actions in all of the different sectors. And all of these actions in our CESMP have implementation plans that go along with them that were developed with our different county departments. So for our transportation sector, we have actions like improving pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure and enhancing connectivity, upgrading our public transit infrastructure, expanding our EV charging network. And as you can see, we have mapped all of these actions to which goal they are addressing. Next slide, please. For electricity, we're looking at things like acquiring clean electricity sources for the county, promoting renewable energy incentive programs, and developing additional solar incentives. and also looking at things like for our county government operations goals, installing solar on county government facilities. Next slide, please. For buildings, we're looking to encourage energy efficiency and electrification retrofits, proposing green zoning regulations, and creating net zero plans for county government facilities. Next slide, please. And lastly, these are our adaptation actions, looking at adopting natural open space requirements, managing stormwater flooding in areas outside of the floodplain, restoring streams to reduce flooding, and planning alternative evacuation routes for flood-prone areas in the county. All right. So I just want to point out, and this has been really helpful for buy-in from the county, that all of the actions in the CESMP contribute to achievement of actions in our comprehensive plan and our strategic plan. So we made sure to map this out in an appendix in the plan, letting everyone know that we're just taking the established strategies that the county has already approved and taking them to the next step of implementation. So we're not proposing anything super new. This is a path that the county has already said that we want to go on, and this plan is really just putting those strategies into action. Next slide, please. So our next steps. So again, the board adopted our CESMP on October 24th. So our next steps are to integrate the CESMP into our comprehensive plan through a comprehensive plan amendment. The board requested that the CESMP be integrated into our comp plan when they created the resolution to create the plan. So again, we have guidance to do so, and we think that this should be an easy next step. We need to develop a system for tracking our progress towards the goals. We do have a head start with this. Through our implementation plans, we created performance metrics so that we worked with county departments on. So, you know, we'll just be able to take that to the next step to begin to track our progress towards our goals. We need to increase staff capacity. I know everyone does, but so our Office of Sustainability is currently myself. So really, we need to increase our capacity for implementation. And I just want to put a plug out there that we're currently recruiting a climate and energy program manager. If you know of any ambitious, smart folks who may be interested, please send them my way. We also need to really begin to collaborate with county agencies for implementation of the actions. You know, the Office of Sustainability, we are holding the strategy, but the implementation is really going to take place amongst the different agencies in the county. And then lastly, as we all are, looking to pursue grant opportunities and opportunities for regional collaboration, hopefully with some of you all. Next slide. All right. I don't know if there is time for questions.
We are running a little bit late. Thank you, Ms. Mano, for an excellent presentation. What a great plan this is. I'm extremely excited to see Prince William County join us all in the region with such a good plan. I will allow for one question, but right now I can hardly see now I can. So is there any one question for Ms. Mano? Otherwise, Julie Rosenberg, I see.
Yeah, I put this in the chat, but not sure if you saw it. I think this is great. I love how comprehensive it is. I might have missed it, but how did the process factor in the growth of data centers? Both in terms of the emissions, the electricity, as well as the air quality and stormwater impact. Having trouble hearing me?
I am. I don't know if it's just me.
No, it looks like. Go on, and I'll try to plug in a minute.
Okay, we may, Julie, we may handle that offline because we're a little bit behind schedule right now. And to be honest with you, I cannot see the question on the chat for some reason. But you know, I'm attending the meeting through a mobile device, and I'm not so sure that I can see everything that I should be seeing. So, Ms. Mano, thank you so much for the presentation again. I believe that there is general excitement. You will get a lot of emails with questions about how you did it and what the next steps and how you are moving forward with implementation of this plan. So thank you so much for.
Thank you. Thanks for allowing me to share.
Quickly, going to the next agenda item, which is the utility data update. Mr. Tim Masters is the person who manages our region's utility data request process with our utilities, gas and electric. So the most recent data analysis, and I'm Mr. Masters, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Karantonis. I'll jump right in and just first provide a bit of background around COG's utility energy data analysis. So just so folks know, each year COG sends out its annual utility energy data survey to the 9 utilities that serve the metropolitan Washington region. The survey deadline is at the end of March, after which COG processes and analyzes the data, followed by a period of QA/QC with the help of both the utilities as well as local jurisdictions. A lot of our BAC members, that's the Built Environment and Energy Advisory Committee, they'll be familiar with this data. A lot of those energy managers and sustainability managers with our local jurisdictions review that data each year, as well as COG's utility data summary. So we produce a data summary each year. It contains, basically it's just a summary of energy consumption data, and this data is also used to inform our greenhouse gas emissions inventories for the region and each local jurisdiction. So each of those data summaries has an electricity overview, a natural gas overview, as well as each utility's energy data. We also produce an all years summary, which just shows a year-by-year comparison of that data. So I'll just go to the next slide here. This slide basically is a graph showing annual electricity and natural gas trends. Electricity is in blue, natural gas is in red. And the dashed lines appear where COG has no recorded data. You can see that between 2005 and 2009. So we do have that data point for 2005 and then from 2009 through 2022. The natural gas consumption trend line is a bit more variable than electricity consumption. This is largely due to weather impacts specifically, but then there's also, you know, for instance, in 2020, there's also potential COVID impacts there. But we usually see this variability with natural gas based on weather impacts. Electricity consumption shows a steady increase between 2009 and 2022. Although there was a bit of a plateau around 2011 through 2017. And just one quick note on COVID impacts. As I said, natural gas consumption took a hit in 2020, which there might be a bit of a COVID impact there. And electricity consumption also decreased slightly in 2020. This was more marked in the District of Columbia and Maryland, while Virginia saw an increase, particularly in commercial electricity consumption. We're largely attributing this to data center growth, which I'll kind of discuss that a little bit more on another slide. So this graph shows annual residential and commercial natural gas consumption trends. Again, residential natural gas is in blue, commercial consumption is in red. The dashed lines, again, is just where COG has no recorded data. And these align quite well with the regional total seen on the previous slide. In the region, residential natural gas consumption is greater than commercial natural gas consumption. And that also is really kind of comes through on the previous slide when you see the overall natural gas trend line. Not much more to say on this slide. So this next slide is electricity consumption, residential and commercial. So this is where we can see a bit of an interesting trend, particularly in commercial electricity consumption. It's very clear that commercial consumption is the driver of overall electricity consumption growth. When we disaggregate the commercial and residential electricity consumption data, we see that residential electricity consumption has stayed relatively level from 2005 through to 2022, while commercial electricity consumption stayed level between around 2010 to 2017 before starting to increase. And this increase aligns with what we've been seeing with regard to data center growth in Northern Virginia. And in fact, when we do disaggregate that data a bit further, we do see that the District of Columbia and Maryland's commercial electricity consumption has actually decreased in the last few years, whereas Virginia, we're rarely seeing a big increase being pushed for commercial electricity consumption. And we're rarely attributing that to really big growth we're seeing in data center development there. This last slide shows a graph showing the growth in the number of renewable energy systems installed across the region. In 2009, COG recorded 439 systems in the region. A goal was included in COG's Regional Climate and Energy Action Plan. This is the 2017 through 2020 plan. And the goal was to reach 30,000 renewable energy systems installed in the region by 2020. So this goal was set based on data collected through 2015, when there were 13,600 systems installed in the region with a total capacity of 132 megawatts. So in 2017, the region surpassed the goal, the 30,000 systems goal, with 33,800 systems installed by the year's end in 2017. So really good news story there. Just really a lot of systems were installed in those years, and in 2022, that number of installed renewable energy systems has increased to just under 73,000 systems, with a total capacity of 807 megawatts. So yeah, I'll end that there. Here's my information if folks have any questions, but happy to take any questions now. So yeah, I'll open it up for folks who have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Masters. This is always an exciting topic because this is always a check on how our energy consumption is growing and how our management actions are really, what is the effect of them on raw data for energy consumption. So are there any questions? I see some discussion on the chat feed, but are there any questions from the room right now? I don't see a lot. Let me see again. I don't see any. So one note for those who are interested in the voracious appetite for energy, for electric energy from data centers. This Loudoun County supervisor from Ashburn, Mike Turner, delivered a pretty compelling presentation in the last conference of the Virginia Association of Counties. I will try to find the electronic file and distribute through Jeff King, so that you can see the latest on this. It's quite amazing. Loudoun County is projecting a level of electric energy need of 10 gigawatts, 10 gigawatts by 2035. It's 2.6 right now. So thank you. So let's move then to our next agenda item that comes with this fantastic acronym CPRG. We are all now comfortable with that, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. And the update we'll receive from Jeff King and Deb Harris, I believe. Jeff and Deb, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes. Good morning, everyone. Climate Pollution Reduction Grant update here. This next slide. Yeah, I think in the past I've briefed you about the overall concept where we have funding through the EPA to develop a priority climate action plan due in March 1st, 2024. So not a lot of time to get what they call a PCAP done. But today I want to focus on an aspect of our work that's that really in many ways is the prize or the goal of what we're trying to do. So as I said, we have funding to do a priority climate action plan. The reason that's important is in a parallel process, EPA has already released a notice of funding opportunity. A NOFO is out on the streets, and this is a competitive application process that our region and members within our region are eligible to apply for. It has total funding of $4.6 billion, and it's to get funding to implement strategies and actions in our climate plans to actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And EPA's, and we'll get into the details of what it is they're looking for, and I'll let Deb handle that. But again, we're getting paid to write a plan. In order to be eligible for the competitive funding, you got to have the project concept, the project measure in the plan. And so again, the plan that the target date, the due date for the plan that we're working on is March 1st, 2024. The due date for the funding proposals is April 1st, 2024. So not a lot of time to get a lot of work done, and we've kicked off the process this past Monday. So we had a kickoff call with the steering committee, the technical committee, and really today just want to walk you through probably one of the key aspects of the asks of those committees. So next slide. And so let me turn it over to Deb. She's going to walk you through what it is that we're thinking EPA is looking for under this NOFO, the implementation grant. So Deb, are you able to come on screen?
I'm here. Thanks, Jeff. So as Jeff said, I'm going to walk through the implementation grants competition information. This is, again, parallel to the PCAP measure development, but the implementation grants and what is rising to priorities potentially for implementation grant applications will also inform the PCAP. So just to start off with, for the grants that EPA is looking for awarding, they must be implementing greenhouse gas reductions, policies, programs, projects, or measures, again, identified in the PCAP, but there's a big emphasis on greenhouse gas reductions, as well as a number of other different metrics that I'll be talking about in a few minutes. Just to also mention, greenhouse gas reductions includes carbon sequestration, so enhancing carbon removal. It's not just direct reductions. And the reduction measures themselves, what are being applied for in the applications, must provide benefits to what EPA is calling LIDACs, or low-income disadvantaged communities. There's also an emphasis on air pollution benefits, so criteria air pollutants, and be cost effective. So for folks who have seen what the cost effectiveness definition is from EPA, it is slightly different for CPRG than how we're traditionally thinking about cost effectiveness. They're defining cost effectiveness for the implementation grants as the short-term reductions, cumulative reductions, 25 to 2030, compared to the implementation grant budget ask. So that's a slightly nuanced definition of cost effectiveness there. And then in addition to defining kind of all of these things within the implementation application, EPA is also looking for outputs that may be quantitative or qualitative in measure to measure effectiveness of the actual measure implementation. The other thing to consider that's just noted on this slide is that grant applications don't have to go to a wholly new idea, a wholly new project or program. They can be an expansion of existing measures or programs already in place. And they can also complement other potential funding sources. So what EPA is looking for is really in the funding space, what are the biggest needs for funding with the kind of biggest bang for reduction with these other benefits? So there has to be a demonstrated need for the funding. Next slide. So there's two pots of money EPA is awarding through this program. The biggest one is the general competition. It's $4.3 billion. There's also a $300 million pot that's going to tribes and territories. The general competition goes to eligible state and local organizational entities that are defined within the NOFO. EPA is anticipating making awards across 5 tiers, or what you see here listed, tier A through E, and award values of $2 million up to $500 million. And this equates to, for them, about 30 to 115 different grants that will be awarded. So I think we've gotten some questions in the past about how EPA is going to be looking at these. You will have to be applying within certain tiers, and EPA will be looking at, I believe, applications within each of these tiers. So when you're defining kind of how much money is being requested in an implementation application, you need to think about being competitive with a similar kind of range of funding that others might be applying for. Next slide. This is just reiterating some of the things I covered up front, but just to put a finer point on how the implementation grant applications will be scored. This is just the high level scoring summary. EPA does break down kind of subsets of scoring within here. So as I mentioned earlier, heavy emphasis on greenhouse gas reductions. So you can see that impact of GHG measures is going to be 60 points. There's, I think, 3 subcategories within there on near-term reductions, long-term reductions, and cost effectiveness. The near-term reductions being the higher point value of available points within that first category. And then the overall project summary and approach, this is 45 points. There's a lot of things that need to go in here, not just a description of the program, but implementation milestones, schedule, different actors that will be involved. So this is kind of the nuts and bolts of how the project or program will actually get implemented. Budget is next, where EPA does provide a standard budget to work with. LIDAC benefits are, again, the low-income disadvantaged community benefits, 35 points. This comes in the form of kind of multiple benefits to take a look at: air pollution and criteria pollution, jobs, energy equity. There's a lot of things wrapped in here. And then environmental results, particularly aligning with EPA's strategic plan and goals, are something that they're considering. And then your own programmatic capacity and past performance and job quality is kind of at the bottom here. Next slide. EPA has published in the NOFO information about grant eligibility and awards. So in terms of applications themselves, one organization can be a lead entity on up to 2 applications, one where they're the individual applicant and one where they're the lead for a coalition. And then you can also, if you are a lead applicant on an application, you can be a part of as many coalitions as you would like to be. So you can be on multiple applications. EPA is encouraging not just individual applicants, but coalitions as well. And these could be made up of various types of considerations, depending on the measure that you're thinking about. So it doesn't necessarily need to be your geographic neighbor. It should be in the region, probably. You can kind of build and accelerate or advance what the measure will be impacting, but there are different considerations in thinking through what those coalitions might look like. EPA is also given not just kind of the range or tiers of money that they'll be awarding, but an indication of how they're going to be doing the awards. These criteria on the bottom of the slide here that they've laid out really are aiming at a few things. One, they're trying to have kind of diversity across the country in terms of where the awards are going. So geographic coverage, they're looking to have diverse geographic coverage, not just for the program as a whole, but within each of the funding tiers. They're also trying to not double awards. So they're not going to award multiple grants to implement the same measure in the same location. So if you think about, for example, they're not going to award incentive money or pots of incentive money to do building electrification at the state level in Virginia and then also in Northern Virginia, because that's kind of double crossing. So there's some nuance in thinking about how the awards are going to be, as well as additional intergovernmental coordination that needs to happen to make sure that we're not double, triple requesting and then trying to figure out who's leading on what. Next slide. So in terms of the PCAP measure development, I just want to kind of bring it back to the implementation grants, back to the PCAP measure development. And this is what ICF is working with COG on developing starting this week. And so anything that's listed in the implementation grant needs to tie back to a measure within the PCAP. And that will need to be explicitly called out in the implementation applications. The PCAP measures themselves can be broader than a specific project or program, so it doesn't need to be necessarily a one-to-one implementation application to explicitly described in the PCAP in the same way, but it does need to tie together. You can see on here in terms of the PCAP measure development, we'll be looking to do kind of a prioritization of different measures that focus on and align with a lot of the things, one, required in the PCAP guidance from EPA, but two, also very aligned with what's required in the NOFO to see what's really rising to the top as priorities for potential funding. Next slide. And Jeff, I will turn it back to you to talk a little bit about the building on the action plan.
Thanks, Deb. So yes, again, the PCAP, as Deb said, is a little higher levels, not getting quite into the specifics. And we're starting out not from scratch, which is good. And I know some other MSAs, metropolitan statistical areas across the country, who also got these planning grants, quite literally are starting from scratch. And as most of all of you on this call know, we've been doing climate work for more than 10 years now and have a pretty robust 2030 climate energy action plan to start from. So we've, during the steering and technical committee call, kind of kicked off with this notion of, we'll likely be looking at the 2030 climate action energy action plan to form the core strategies that we would include in the PCAP, and then building off of those strategies would be the measures that then link to the project ideas for the implementation funding. My sense is, and we'll have better clarity on this in mid-December, late December, after we've had a chance to hear back from the technical committee folks and meet again with the technical committee. But I would venture to guess we probably in the priority climate action plan wouldn't try to tackle all of these, that we would figure out which of the top priorities to look at. And just off the bat, I'm thinking we're going to probably see interest in on-site renewables. My hunch is we're probably going to see lots of interest in large-scale off-site renewables. And I know there's going to be continued interest in light-duty electric vehicle deployment, possibly some interest in things like building benchmarking and deep building retrofits. So again, we're working with the technical committee to kind of suss out of the strategies and actions in our existing plan, which ones do we want to prioritize for the PCAP. So that's one piece of information we're seeking from the technical committee. Next slide. And across the range of those high level strategies, there's a whole bunch of different greenhouse gas reduction measures, and they cut across the core sectors. So the same ones we've been working focused on for quite some time now: the transportation sector, electric power, the generation of our energy that we use, in the building sector. So looking at, again, renewable energy projects, building electrification, energy codes, electric vehicle and charging infrastructure, those types of things as the measures. But it goes beyond those core sectors. It could include waste, water, the supply chain, sustainable materials, management, ag, and even, as Deb mentioned, carbon removal. So tree planting, forestry, those types of green infrastructure. Next slide. And so to help inform the PCAP, and knowing that we are under the gun in terms of timing to get both a PCAP prepared by March, and then hopefully some coalition of the willing and interested parties from the region to chase after that implementation funding, we kicked off our steering and technical committee with basically a call for projects. To the extent that folks are able to put pen to paper and come up with really strong project ideas that they'd be willing to take to an implementation proposal and then actually implement the project, that would go a long way to informing what it is we'd want to put in the PCAP. So we kicked off this process by basically a call for projects, and many of you on this call are part of that group. So we're looking for as much detail as we can get on what it is you'd like to get funding to do to implement greenhouse gas uh, uh, reduction projects. And so you can see the types of information we're seeking, asking about whether or not it's, a new or expanded program. Are there policy, any new policy requirements? Is the project currently feasible? Would there need to be things done to make it feasible? What the approach would be, who the lead agency would be, and whether or not you have the legal authority to implement it. Details on the budget and cost, and then ultimately, and we're able to help quite a bit on that with our consultant support and our own staff. Peeling back and looking at how do we assess the greenhouse gas emission benefits, how do we assess the impact on LIDAC communities and workforce, those kinds of things. So next slide. So we also, at the kickoff meeting, provided an example of something that, could be food for thought as folks think about what they might want to propose. So for instance, if we're looking at needing to do something to generate emission reductions in the near term, so let's say the next 2, 3, 5 years, and we likely would want to look at things that are already existing programs that really have a high potential to expand. And so we use this example of, well, one of the options might be we propose to expand solarized programs, the whole concept of solar co-ops. It's already been successful in the district, Maryland and Virginia. Can we ask for money to scale that up and do more? And this is interesting in that interesting timing in that just last week, the COG Board of Directors adopted a new solar resolution calling for getting our region up to 250,000 solar rooftops by 2030. Right now, we're around 72,000. And by my back of the envelope calculations, we kind of need to triple the number of systems that we're deploying annually each year between now and 2030 to reach that target. I think it's doable. It certainly would be a lot easier to get it done if we had substantial funding through the CPRG to help do that. So we put forth this concept of an example. This is the type of information we'd be looking for. We would need to figure out who the lead applicant would be. We need to figure out how they would procure a contractor to help with that, who the project partners would be. One really interesting aspect of this grant, the NOFO and the grant opportunity is the EPA, unlike for instance the Federal Highway CFI, the Community Charging Infrastructure Grant. In the case of the DOT Federal Highways Grant for infrastructure deployment, we would have had to compete for partners in advance of the proposal, and it would all have to be done kind of like a procurement. In the case of the CPRG program, they're actually EPA's treating it more like the Diesel Emission Reduction Act. So program beneficiaries are eligible. The grant could involve, for instance, reimbursement to residents and businesses and governments for the equipment they may purchase to reduce emissions. So for instance, I could envision a situation where we have a clean energy grant fund, for instance, where we actually directly reimburse folks for installing solar systems on their homes. So we could be writing checks for $10,000 a home. Everybody, you prove that you got a new solar system installed, you get reimbursed. So that kind of thing is actually eligible. I think it's something to look at. In the case of the DEER program, the Diesel Emission Reduction Act, we have a long history of doing this. That's modeled around, the EPA will pay for a new cleaner engine to be installed in your equipment. So we've replaced pretty much all of the engines on all of the boats down on the Potomac River, all the passenger vessels, Spirit of Mount Vernon, Spirit of Washington, all have new engines under the DEER program. We're doing locomotives at Union Station. We've done construction equipment. So I urge folks to think about that concept that this CPRG can involve program beneficiaries getting direct reimbursement for their equipment they purchased. Next slide. And this is just more of the project example. So just kind of looking at, the budget and cost, how much we'd actually need to ask for, what kind of funding sources we would have to leverage, what kind of equity impact it would have, information on workforce, et cetera. So next slide. So in terms of the timeline, again, I been very frustrated in how EPA rolled out this program. I think we're kind of having to do a year plus of planning work in less than 3 months at this point. So we had the kickoff November 13th. We're asking for folks to give us input and feedback on the strategies and their projects and measures by hopefully by December 1st. Really tight time frame. We're going to have to do some specialized targeted engagement. That's a mandatory part of the planning process. We're going to have to do that in December if we can pull that off, maybe into January. We're going to want to schedule a technical committee meeting in December to discuss all the input and feedback we got from our call for projects. Assuming that goes well, we'll likely do a mid-course check-in with the steering committee, asking them to kind of review the preliminary list of projects and measures. ICF COG with ICF support is going to need to, draft up that PCAP toot suite and get it ready for review as early as late December, early January. We would then need to convene the technical committee again in January to review the draft of the PCAP. Hopefully that would be in fine shape. We would then take it to the steering committee for final approval, giving us some time in February to put a bow on it and get it submitted in time to meet that March 1st deadline. And hopefully, in parallel to that, we would have some formation of some coalition or multiple coalitions or something to kind of get a group together to want to chase the implementation funding. EPA has said that they intend to issue all of that $4.6 billion in 2024. So we kind of pretty much only have one whack at it, and it's going to be in the next 3 months. So that'll be a big challenge for us. So we have a lot of work to do to get this all done, and really pleased that we have ICF support. I should say one thing I didn't mention is we as in Metropolitan Statistical Area have funding to do the PCAP. All states, or I shouldn't say all, some states actually opted out. I think 4 states opted out of this program entirely. I guess we're not keen on taking action on climate. But so all states got $3 million to do statewide plans. Interesting concept that's been floated, and I think probably should think some more about, is EPA might be most interested in funding states under this program. They have, I think, more familiarity and working directly with the state air agencies, for instance. And there's even the concept of multiple states going in together to form a coalition. So I could envision, for instance, a mid-Atlantic climate coalition coming together to form some large clean energy grant program or something, and then designing the eligibility for that grant program to be around things like, installing solar on homes or carports and building deep energy retrofits, that kind of stuff. So we shall see how these conversations play out. Again, really challenging to get this work done in the short timeline. We sure could have used an entire year to work on this, but it's unfortunately driven by a statutory deadline. So we're looking at March 1st, and it's not going to change, I don't think. I think that's our last slide.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff.
I should say we have a Survey Monkey and on the website, and I guess I'll put it in the link. The website, we have a Word and Excel form of those that call for projects. So if you find it easier to work in a Word or Excel document as opposed to a Survey Monkey form, we have multiple options to get your input, and I will, I guess, ask Alyssa, maybe you could put the link to the kickoff meeting, which has these documents, in the chat.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yep, doing that now.
And Deb, that was an important presentation. It is really about money, and it is really about bringing projects forward and looking at, a good pathway to realization. So I hope that everybody takes advantage of that, and I am already very, very grateful to to everybody who is participating in the steering committee for this. As everybody can see, this is really a very compressed timeline. Speaking of compressed time, we are also now nearing the end of our meeting, but we haven't heard from members and updates from our jurisdiction. So I would like to open that first to the folks from the state of Maryland. If there is any, let me just improve I see Dave Snyder. Just a second. Let's see if it's somebody from Maryland. I will also call folks from the District of Columbia. Jolene Ivy, I want to give you the word. You are muted, Madam Vice Chair, which is an appropriate hazing for you. But...
Sorry. So sorry. Sorry, I was late. I was on the wrong link or something. Just kept telling me I was in the waiting room. So in any event, glad to be here. Got a lot out of the meeting. Just any kind of update. I have a couple of apartment buildings that are planned for my area, and the builder was not able to meet all the requirements for trees in the parking lot. So a condition that I came up with was to make up for not having enough trees, we're having them add solar panel canopies in the parking lot. So they're not jumping up and down with excitement, but so far they seem to be willing to do that rather than not be able to build the apartment buildings. So there's my update for the moment.
Thank you, Julie. I will jump over to the City of Falls Church, that in 2050 will be leading the region by being the first net zero jurisdiction, right, Mr. Snyder?
Well, that's our hope. So yes, on Monday night, we approved a more aggressive goal, and then a energy climate change plan. And maybe Jeff King, if it's possible, we might want to present on that in a future meeting. The one point of controversy was more density in residential areas, and I know, Takis, you're very familiar with that issue. So that's the one area of caution that I think we've learned. You want total community buy-in if you can possibly get it. But more to the point, I want to go back to the prior presentation. I firmly believe that regional entities like COG are the most capable of moving forward in this area, far more so than even at the state level. So my hope is that we will come forward with a lot of great projects, projects where COG jurisdictions actually are doing things across their jurisdictional lines, and thereby illustrating the value of the Council of Governments. But I also hope that whatever we do to get together is put in the framework of making a true and convincing case that it's really at the regional level, particularly regions like us that have multiple state level jurisdictions, is the most efficient and effective way to address a lot of these issues. Now, there are national policy issues, clearly, and state policy issues that affect what we do, and we're dependent upon them acting. But I think in terms of particular projects, local and regional level is the place where I think we can make a great case, and hopefully we will. Thanks a lot, Mr. Chairman, for a couple moments of discussion. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Snyder. Exciting news. And I could add something that connects. It's a very good segue from Falls Church, the big connector between Arlington County and the City of Falls Church
is Langston Boulevard, formerly known also as Lee Highway. Arlington County, after 11 years of deliberation, has finished this past Saturday. We passed a comprehensive corridor development plan. It is our first green planned urban corridor that has there's a significant component of policy intentionality around climate change mitigation. It has, for example, a 39% tree canopy coverage goal. It has, despite the fact that it adds significant additional housing capacity, also specifically affordable housing capacity. It is, trying to affect a significant modal shift from, this is a mostly, car-based transportation corridor, and we want this to progress into a transit transportation corridor. It has a lot. It introduces urban features like so-called greenways, which are really, green gaps and corridors between building blocks. So a lot of details on that. I was very excited to see our community coming together and really insist and expect answers to questions like, how exactly are we going to reduce our carbon footprint? How are we going to mitigate stormwater, which is a significant and very expensive item there? How are we deal with heat island effects, etc.? So I invite everybody to check it out on the Arlington County website. It's very easy to find it. This was the biggest accomplishment of the last few days in Arlington County. Thank you. Is there any other update? I see none. So at this point, I wanted to do two things. Number one, it is my last meeting presiding this committee in a regular meeting for this year. It has been absolutely an honor for me to do that. However, before I go forward on this, I want to recognize Penny Gross, whose last meeting is today, and I can imagine, I don't know how many hundreds, maybe even more than that, probably thousands of meetings for COG. Our number one by excellence regionalist has spent here and everywhere across the entire COG system. So Penny, it is really an honor to have you here in this committee and being part of the last meetings that you are having here at COG after a very, very long and prolific career in the region. If you want to say a few words.
Thank you, Takis. Yes, it's been 28 years of doing a lot of COG. The only thing I managed to avoid, and I did it purposely, is I never did TPB. Did everything else, but it has been a pleasure to see how the region is working together beautifully. It wasn't always that way. We've taken on a lot of new challenges, and I think we're doing a very good job. I had made some remarks before you were able to come on to the meeting, Takis, and so I will simply say thank you. And one more piece of advice: do not leave the discussion in the room. Take it out, talk to people, let your constituents know. The things that COG is doing are worthy of newspaper columns, newsletter items. People need to know what we're doing in the region together. And it's a great story, and we need to thank staff for keep making us look good, but I do appreciate it. I'm going to miss you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. I realize that we have one loose end still this year. This is the report from our regional tree canopy subcommittee, which is almost ready, at least in draft form, right, Jeff? So we were thinking of calling you all to a call for an extraordinary meeting or a workshop on the region's tree canopy. And Penny, this will be still while you are an elected official, and it would be a delight if you could preside over this meeting. So we would really like to offer that to you as the last meeting, as the really last meeting. I think we have,
I would be delighted. I would be delighted. I am thrilled with the report that I've seen so far, and I would be delighted. Thank you.
So, and realizing that some of us have to go now to TPB, which already started, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. I learned from Penny Gross and others, but specifically from Penny Gross, that we have 3 jobs here. The first job is to bring stakeholders, administrators, everybody who is relevant for our cause here around one table and create a center of competence for the region and for the COG as an organization. The second is we are under an obligation to surface and vet new policies, new ideas, to really dig deeper and find out and see what may work, what is proposable, so to say, and bring it forward to the board of COG. We've done that with 2 things, with the EV and EVs infrastructure this year. We've done that also with solar. And the third one, and this I think is Penny's favorite one, is to bring all this back to our jurisdictions, to our legislators, and to our people. And this is a continuous task, and I am so delighted to have been part of this group. To the staff of COG, especially Jeff and Maya, who's not with us today, thank you. Thank you for your leadership and for the support, companionship, and camaraderie, and so for everybody in this room. So, and with that, I think we are adjourned for today. More to come on the tree canopy still for this year. And our next meeting will be January 24th. And Jolene Ivy will be presiding that. I look forward to join that meeting. So thank you very much. Enjoy a blessed Thanksgiving. And until next time. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.